So just a little bit before I started recording this video, we had a major announcement made that really is going to bring in a whole new era for Cloud9 CSGO. And really why I say that is because none of the original members are now left on Cloud9 as far as the core members that came from Complexity that formed up Cloud9. And the only remaining member from the glory days of C9's summer run in 2015 is Skadoodle. Everything else from that time period where C9 really made a name for themselves is no longer there. And so this will be essentially a new era for Cloud9. It's not simply just a couple of roster moves. It really changes the whole identity of the team and really departs from the past in a major way on how they functioned before, how they've been functioning lately, and how they will most likely function in the future. I mean, anytime you make a roster move that has multiple members, it's always going to be pretty drastic. You imagine on how it affects the team, but in this particular case, when you think about the history, you think about who left and who's on, it is certainly, just a huge evolution in Cloud9. And of course, what I'm talking about, if for whatever reason you've been living under a rock today, we had what has been one of the biggest announcements in North American CSGO roster history. I mean, there really isn't many moves in NACS history that is as big as this one. And when you think about all the context around it, this might be the biggest. I haven't really thought too much about historical moves, but this one is certainly huge. There's no and ifs or buts about that. Also, you have to forgive me. I didn't really outline this. This might be a bit all over the place. But I just wanted to kind of give initial reactions to this. And again, the move is that Shroud has actually stepped down from the team. This was discussed on his stream. It came from his own mouth that he decided that he wanted to move into a full-time streamer role. And essentially, he kind of wants to experiment with it to see what full-time streaming can bring him, if he's happy with it, if it continues to bring him the financial success that it has been for a long time as he's been juggling between streaming and being a player. And so there's probably no risk there as far as financial success, but he just kind of wanted to see how it felt, if it made him happy. He'll see if he misses competing or not. Maybe he does and he'll eventually want to return. Maybe he doesn't and he'll just find himself being way happier being a full-time streamer. Either way, apparently he had reached out to Jack, C9's owner, told him, hey, I want to try out full-time streaming. Can we do that? And Jack was supportive of it, and he transitioned into a full-time streamer role. He makes himself available as a backup for the team if for whatever reason they need him for some type of online qualifier or pro league matches or what have you. Any type of situation where one of their starting five can't make it, he'll be there to fill in if need be. Of course, Brax has been being used in that capacity, and he will be using this capacity for the ESL1 New York qualifiers in place of Automatic. But anyway, that's what's going on with Shroud. And then nothing, according to Shroud, he wasn't involved in this decision because he had already decided he was going to lead the team and become a full-time streamer. He claims that the other, members of the team had made a team decision to remove nothing from the starting lineup. And so, in a sense, nothing was actually benched. From what I can tell, from what Shroud said on the stream and from what the language of the announcements and stuff seemed to indicate. So as far as what will happen with nothing, hard to know, right? He could move on to streaming himself. He has an amazing personality for doing content, and I imagine he could be very successful if he wanted to do that. I know at times in the past he has expressed interest in being a broadcaster, whether it be as a color commentator or as a desk analyst. I could easily see him transitioning into that type of role. Again, he has a great brand. He has a great personality. He's a very just good character for content like that. He really is a great individual when it comes to stuff like that. And so that could certainly be something that he decides to do going forward. On top of that, maybe he does still have the desire to compete, in which case maybe you see him join another team. That certainly is another possibility. I think he still has value as a player. So he certainly could transition into another team. Maybe he'll get, moved. This shuffle that's going on right now. Who really knows? So I think that we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens on that. And whenever that does happen, maybe I'll make another video or something. Maybe I've jumped the gun. Maybe I should have waited for that to become clear. But I kind of want to just hit the initial announcement and the initial reaction. So we'll see what happens. Now, in their place is going to be Rush and Tarik from Optic, which makes the full five for the current team going forward. Unless there's something else that happens, it's going to be Stewie, Automatic, and Skadoodle. And then it'll be Rush and Tarik. Now, when you think about Rush and Tarik leaving Optic to join Cloud9, it actually makes a hell of a lot of sense. I mean, Optic has been in complete disarray ever since Stanislaw departed for Liquid. There's been a revolving door on their roster when it comes to who was going to be a fifth for them. You know, you basically had Jason R. and Hayes, and then, you know, before that, they obviously had Hiko stand in for them for a little bit, almost, you know, in the immediate aftermath of Stanislaw leaving. It was almost kind of like a trade in that regard. But, you know, obviously Hiko didn't wind up staying with them. And then, like I said, you had the Jason R, you had the Hayes, you had Freakazoid stand in for them a little bit, I think. They've obviously had different coaches come in with, you know, Peacemaker coaching, then Hayes coaching, and then Hayes bringing in I Am Pet to replace him as a coach because he was going to pursue playing and all this best. So there's really been so much instability over there, like I said, ever since the vacuum was left, or the void, whatever you want to call it, of Stanislaw departing. And then you've even heard, you know, discussions in the past of you know, people trying to go to Liquid. Like there was this idea that there might have been a move where Rush and Mixwell might have joined Liquid. That was certainly something that was discussed and may have possibly happened. Rush even said in a statement on Twitter that he had passed up opportunities in the past to remain with Optic, but he couldn't pass this one up. So that seems to kind of really hint towards the idea that, you know, at different points in time, other players might have left as well. We know about Mixwell. You know, there was a chance that he might have gone to Mouse Sports. What was some of the reports that was going on? And even in a Vision podcast, Hex talks about, you know, the idea of maybe Mixwell wanting to leave and missing home, missing his family, and, you know, the idea of facilitating a move like that in the future. So, I mean, right now, if you're looking at Optic, you had a situation where it's like, all right, we don't have a fifth. Mixwell kind of might want to leave, it looks like. So it's just going to be Tarik, Naf, and Rush at that point, right? And now if you're Optic and Tarik and Rush have left, you really only have Naf completely solidified, it feels like. And then you have Mixwell, but then it seems like maybe he wants to move on as well. So it's a very difficult situation, and I feel for them in that regard, and it's been that way for a while. So the point is I can see why they wanted to leave. You know, it's really hard to even take results seriously because of the fact we never really felt like we had a stable Optic for a very long time. It's been months of this. And so, yeah, that really just kind of explains itself. As far as their value as players, I mean, certainly Rush has been one of the best entry fraggers in NA at times throughout his tenure with Optic, particularly when they had that run at E-League Season 2 where they won, and they had a couple of other tournaments where they were playing really well, like they won the Northern Arena Montreal event. So when you look at like the tail end of 2016 and coming into the new year, you know, Rush was one of the best entry fraggers in North America. I mean, it was basically like him, Elysian, Stewie 2K were like the names that really came to the forefront of North American entry fragging. And so in that regard, he has a lot of value. Now, obviously, his stock kind of went down whenever Stanislaw left the team and they were in complete disarray. But you imagine that those are fairly tied together, and the chances of Rush being able to be a contending player again is probably pretty high. So it brings a lot of value. Tarik is a very versatile type of guy. And he really did come into his own at Optic at times, really did find his place, you know, and was able to bring value and firepower to the team. He never had to be the main guy because you had Rush playing really strong and Mixwell playing really strong at times when Naf would pop off, and, you know, Stanislaw as an in-game leader was a really good fragging in-game leader, as in-game leaders go. So he didn't have to be the main guy because there were some other star players on that team who were consistently performing or could have substantial impact. And he's going to be in another situation like that if you really think about it, when you think about the level that Stewie Dynamatic can play at, and if Rush can get back in good form, then Tarik doesn't have to be the main guy on this team either. So it's one of those things where Tarik certainly is a versatile guy. He's probably played every role at some point in time in his career between all the different things he bounced around doing at CLG and what he's done with Optic, and he definitely has good mechanics. In a interview on the Peaker's Advantage podcast that Davey does with Daps, Finesse, Simphis, and then they bring on guests. They brought on I'm the Pet, the coach for Optic, and he even talked about the potential of Tarik being an in-game leader. That was tossed around, like Tarik was going to be the in-game leader of Optic going forward, and I'm a Pet mentioned that Tarik was actually really good at mid-round reading and making mid-round adjustments and like calling audibles in the heat of the moment, but that he just struggled with getting things started, like, you know, taking initial map control and just kind of calling the start of rounds, but very good once the round started flowing and how to adjust and how to read things. So that's actually quite interesting to think about, because I know that people have always had this reputation about tarik as being kind of like all aim, no brain type of player. But the fact that, he had this apparently intuitive sense of reading rounds, you kind of wonder, does he now have stock as an in-game leader if he can work on some of his shortcomings with early round situations? Because we know that Stewie 2K didn't really seem to want to in-game lead. He did it out of necessity, but he did it well. For what he was working with, and all that good stuff, right? So it'll be interesting to see what happens in that regard as far as in-game leading goes, because it seemed like tarik wanted to do it, was willing to try it. Stewie 2K at times seemed iffy about wanting to do it, but certainly was capable, and did it out of necessity. Maybe his mood changed about in-game leading later on. I'm not really sure, but I just remember there being an interview not too long ago where he talked about how he'd rather just focus on playing. So it'll be interesting to see how everything is set up. I mean, the thing is Cloud9 certainly, you could argue, needed changes. I mean, yeah, they did well to qualify for the major. Props to them on that. They obviously had a couple of good events, like at ESL1 Cologne was a pretty big finish for them. Obviously, the last ECS finals, I mean, they were able to beat Astralis, and that was pretty big stuff for them there. I think they lost to FaZe in the best of 3, like 0-2 or something like that at that tournament, if I'm not mistaken. ESL1 Cologne, I mean, they took second. Well, they lost to SK in the finals, I think, and I know they beat NIP in a best of 3, and I think they beat Navi as well, but we know what struggles Navi have had. Nip's been in transition as well, so I mean, it wasn't like that was like they weren't beating top 5 teams in the world to make it to the finals of that event, but still a good finish, don't get me wrong. But when you get before that, I mean, some of the DreamHack Open events they've been to throughout the year haven't gone so well. Obviously, going out in groups at the major itself was kind of a struggle. And then when you look really early this year at Vegas and things of that nature, they certainly had some poor finishes in those events as well, struggling to get out of groups in those regards. So certainly with their results, I guess if you just look in the last few months because of the the Cologne finish and the fact that they qualified for the major and the fact that ECS went pretty well and the fact they were playing really well online, like I almost feel that kind of gives you this false sense of that they were fine, when in reality there was plenty of results surrounding those that weren't as great. Especially for a team like C9, where you expect them to be perhaps the best team in North America and be consistently a top 10 team in the world. And in that regard, some of their other results surrounding the good parts were not acceptable if you're really wanting to be at that caliber. And so it certainly makes sense that they want to make moves when you think of it that way, if they felt like they had exhausted all their resources and they weren't going to get any better with the 5 that they had. As far as the outlook for this new C9, I mean, I think that there's a hell of a lot of firepower on this team. There's no question about it, that the skill ceiling of this team is quite high. When you retain 2 of the best players that you had, Stewie and Amatic, who were a fantastic kind of entry combo, really worked off of each other well, or just seemed to play well, were fairly consistent players, definitely have high skill. And then you're adding in a guy like Rush, who can be a fantastic entry fragger. Not really sure what else he could do in other roles, but as an entry fragger, he certainly proved himself at the end of last year when he had like a real team around him that wasn't in complete disarray. And then you have a guy like tarik, who, like Stewie, is quite versatile. Like, both of those guys can play different roles. They can op, they can rifle. Maybe they can both in-game lead to a degree, so bouncing ideas off of each other. And automatic, like those 3 could really maybe bring a lot to the table as far as what they want to do strategically with their coach Valens. So tarik brings a lot. And then you retain Skadoodle, who now can just be a serviceable opper, and that won't even handicap the team because of what other firepower they have. Which I think he was kind of getting back in form. And so if he continues to do that, great. But if not, I mean, he doesn't have to be a highlight player for this team, not when you think about the other players that make up the lineup. I think the interesting thing that you have to think about with this new Cloud9 team is what roles are they really going to have? Because for a while now, it's been the Stewie automatic entry combo, right? And it's like, do you really want to mess with that? Because it's been working. But at the same time, you just picked up Rush, who is an entry fragger for the most part, and a very good one. So you would imagine at that point, the ideal setup would be for Stewie and Rush to be an entry combo, right? And then that would mean that Automatic is probably going to get pushed back into a peripheral or a lurking role. Now, what people will often overlook is the fact that Automatic was really good, obviously, with C9. He put up big numbers, particularly when they won that EPL in Brazil against the SK guys, and the numbers he put up at that event, the numbers he's put up at other events, and how consistent he's been as an entry duo kind of thing with Stewie. But people will overlook the fact that his final tournaments with TSM, while he was a lurker, were also quite good. Like, he was already kind of ramping up before he even transitioned to C9. Yeah, sure, C9 is where he realized his full potential, but he was already kind of ramping up a bit, and he was doing that from a lurking role. Like when you saw TSM's finish at that ECS of that year that he was playing with TSM, or you look at how he was playing at E-League Season 1 with TSM, I think it was. He was putting up good numbers with that team from a lurk role, so he's certainly capable of playing a lurk role. He's done it in the past for like old Tempo Storm lineup alongside like Rix and Roka and Shazam and all those guys. Played a little bit of lurking on that team, did some lurking on Complexity. This is a guy that can play that role, and he's a very smart player. He's very good. He's good at decision making. He reads the game well. He could still play that role and still be successful. Maybe he's not going to be highlight and flashy in your face as much if he's moving away from playing with Sui and an entry combo. But I think it makes more sense to move Automatic to like a lurker peripheral type role to allow Rush to continue entry fragging alongside Stewie, then it makes sense to transition Rush into that type of role where he doesn't really have a history playing that, whereas at least Automatic does. So I think you have to kind of see how that's going to go, because you have a lot of aggressive prone riflers on this team now is the thing, and so you have to try to figure out how you're going to fill lurk and peripheral roles, because theoretically any of these guys can be second entry type players, right? So that's going to be like one of the biggest points of contention that'll be interesting to follow. And then the in-game leader thing will also be interesting to follow, because you have Tarik and Stewie, and you have Stewie who's been doing it and who can do it and who has done it out of necessity, at least that's how he started, and he's had mixed feelings about doing it. And then you have a guy named Tarik who doesn't really have a history doing it, but apparently has a desire to try it. At least that's what was going to happen on Optic. So maybe Tarik will try it from the start, see what happens. If it doesn't work out, Stewie will just pick it back up, just like whenever he tried it out with Automatic in game leading and picked it back up when that didn't seem to work out. So that's certainly, in the cards as well to try to think about it. I will say this though, like there is a lot of options for this team because of the players they have on who might second op or how they might use other people opping between like Tarik and Stewie 2K and obviously Skrull being the main op. Also, I could really see this team just being so good at fast-paced executing sites, because when you think about the Optic team that was able to win E-League Season 2, one of their biggest strengths was just swarming a site. Like, let's take B-Bomb site on Cobblestone, for example. When you had Rush entry fragging, sure, but you had Stanislaw, who was quite flexible as a rifler, as an in-game leader between entering and lurking, and he could get in the mix with a Rush and help open things up. And then on top of that, you had Mixwell, who when he didn't have an AWP in his hands was also kind of an entry-type rifler, so you throw like Rush, Mixwell, and him in the mix, and then you throw Tarik in there as well. So I mean, you had a lot of aggressive prone riflers who could just come out and they could just trade frag really well. They could just swarm a site, just like Zerg rush a site, just to swarm it out and be able to trade frag and open things up. And that was like one of the really big strong suits of Optic when they were at their peak. Well, this team could theoretically do a very similar thing. I mean, think about taking a site when you get to throw Automatic, Stewie, and Rush in there all at the same time, and you sprinkle in a little bit of Tarik in there as well. Like, the amount of trade fragging capability that team has doing a fast-paced push on a site is going to be very high, and you have to think that's going to be a part of the game plan. That's going to be an option that they're going to have. But when they do want to play slower defaults, I think that's when we have to kind of see how they want to set up the peripheral roles. Like I said, if it were me, I would think it would be maybe Tarik and Automatic playing peripheral roles while you have, Stewie, Rush, and Skadoodle as kind of the control group or what have you. Like, that's probably what I think makes the most sense, but I guess you could see maybe other people take that up as well. But either way, this is a very exciting looking team. The skill ceiling on the team is very high. Seem to have a lot of really big pieces that can do big things. I think they can really leverage the fact they have a lot of aggressive riflers to play a very fast-paced aggressive style and be a very good at swarming and trade fragging on T sides, and have good aimers for CT sides and good decision makers, and some of their players who are very intuitive in how they play. I think they have a lot of options with some of the versatility some of these players have. I think that the firepower is just great. I think it's just going to be, like I said, about trying to figure out how you're going to play default map control, how you're going to fill peripheral roles when those are needed, and just how people work together, how personalities mesh. That obviously matters a lot as well. what Valence can bring to the table as a coach as well, how that's going to affect things. And then obviously in the aftermath, we have to see what happens to a guy like Nothing, or what happens to the remnants of Optic, or the brand of Optic itself in CSGO as other things to think about. But this is a new era for C9. It's going to be an exciting time to see what this lineup can do. I think this is one of the biggest moves that we've had in NA CSGO history. I think it's one of the most intriguing moves we've had in NA CSGO history, and you really have put a lot of firepower underneath one roof with this team. And so it'll be interesting to see what they can do. I think that they have it's going to be a hard time dealing with these guys with just the firepower they have, particularly within the NA scene and pro league play and stuff like that. C9's always been pretty good online qualifying for stuff, and I have to imagine that they're still going to be very powerful at doing that. I think they could be dangerous in international land setting as well. I think this should take C9 up a notch and give them a chance to compete a bit better than what was kind of a mixed bag lately. So yeah, that's kind of my initial thoughts on it. Let me know what you think. Hope you enjoy it. Please subscribe for more content. Thanks a lot.